Good morning, everyone. I call this meeting of the Governance Committee to order. We'll start with a roll call. Assistant Mayor Kelly.
Here.
Councilor Tabor.
Here.
Councilor Lombardi.
Here.
And I'm Councilor Cook, and I am here. And we have the Deputy City Manager here joining us today as well. We are going to start our day with a review of the minutes from the January 13th, 2025 meeting. Did everyone have a chance to see the minutes?
Move to accept.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, the minutes are approved. Our first item of business today is the Administrative Code, Chapter 1. And we have updates to that administrative code, which I will share on your screen so that everybody can see them. I'm going to scroll through. You'll see here through the minutes.
The red lined ones.
And I'll go to the red line version. There's a clean version first. But here is the red line version for everyone to see. And we will start with the administrative organization section, 1.102. And I'm going to turn it over to the Deputy City Manager, who has been working with the staff and all of our departments on how to update the code.
Thank you, Councilor Cook. So as we discussed at the last governance meeting, in follow-up to this committee's interest in updating chapters 1 and 2 in particular as part of our start to clean up parts of the ordinance, we made some housekeeping from our point of view, edits to the administrative organization section. So if you're not aware, the city charter does require that we have this section of our Chapter 1 of our ordinances to help define the structure of government. And so it was in need of some updating. And most of this is pretty simple, I think, as a practical matter. You've seen on the annual budget documents how economic and community development is now together. Planning is now planning and sustainability. Welfare also includes our outside social services. So I don't think there's any really big changes there. Human resources and negotiations got combined. We can move on to the next section. So what you'll see in section 1.105 really just cleaned up the language with regard to general powers and duties of the department and administrators. And again, really not changing substance, mostly just tightening the language so that we can be efficient in our use of words. Then we get to chapter section 1.106, specific duties, functions, and responsibilities. You'll see there's a change to the city manager's section as we flagged that we now have communications is part of her charge. So you're all familiar with Monty Bohannon and his excellent work with regard to communications. So that has been added. I think that's important to flag the importance right now with her role as seeing that we have good communication for transparency, dissemination of information, and to kind of bring in a different level of engagement. City clerk's description mildly updated. Again, the change to economic and community development, representing the kind of collapsing of that. Updated finance language. You'll recall that we did add new language here, and that is in paragraph D of this section 1.106 to address the fact that we would rather not have to spend money unnecessarily doing an audit every time the tax collector position is changed. So we do have regular reconciliation and internal controls. So that section of the state law that requires an audit every time we have a change in tax collector is really, from our point of view, a waste of resources, but it needs specific authority to be able to not have to do that. That's really there for the smaller towns. Human resources and negotiations, you'll see updated language there. Made this language, frankly, more in line with the charter that talks about the Human Resources Department playing a central role across not only the City Hall municipal structure, but across the charter departments to assist them in the common human resource functions related to hiring, training. And it's not that that piece doesn't get delegated, of course, within the various departments and participation, but it is trying to make it clearer and reconcile it a little better with the charter language that talks about that important role. Then we get to information technology, and this is an area that this committee specifically had an interest in at the last meeting, which is why we have our guests here today. And again, in this sense, kind of like human resources, you will see there was an update to the charter in 2000, which talks about the information technology department and its intention to help be a resource and a guiding light, shall we say, across the municipal organization. So it specifically includes charter departments. And so that language has been updated to be more consistent with the charter. But there are folks here to speak to that vision and goal and how to move more in that direction. Inspections, again, updated language, but no real change to the substance. Library and rec, really what we mostly did there is recognize the fact that, well, library and recreation departments handle the program. They get a lot of support from Public Works and the maintenance of their facilities, as well as IT, because of course IT is so integral to both of, their operations in terms of various programs and software packages that they need to get their work done and to interact with the public. Planning and sustainability, you see that change, again, given their new responsibilities that are a little broader than strictly zoning. Public Works, again, slight update to the language, but from our perspective, nothing substantive. Talked about welfare and outside social services. Under section 1.107, you'll see authority of the city manager. Here, we were just basically moving some provisions around to, there's a section in Chapter 2 that talks about, I think it's Chapter 2, that talks about the city manager having authority to execute deeds and leases. We just put this more logically here under section 1.107. In addition, the language on emergency management it's changed a little over the years, and it's not a separate department, so we put it under section 1.107B, and so grabbed and updated that language in terms of her emergency management role with, of course, the fire department and other resources that we have. So that's the quick overview for that, and happy to dive into anything, or you can hear from your guests.
I think that we shouldn't keep anyone any longer than necessary. So is everyone here to speak to information technology?
Yes.
So let's then start there, and then we can go back and answer any other questions anyone on the committee has after that. And I guess I should ask our Chief Information Officer probably to come up and speak
Yes.
first.
Suzanne, is it okay if I distribute?
Sure. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
I have mine.
Thank you.
Thank you, counselors, for inviting me to speak to this group. When we looked at rewriting the administrative code, the request was what it could look like if central IT or the city's IT department had a role in all of the departments, including the charter departments. And so we wrote it as such. And we included a line at the end that the CIO is in charge with fulfilling the priorities and vision of the leadership of the charter departments in order to ensure the specific needs of the charter departments are met. And I think that communicates that the IT department fulfills what is asked by the charter departments and is responsible for meeting all their needs. So the charter departments maintain the control over what they need to do, and the IT department helps with the how it gets done. Regarding the handout that I just gave everyone to look over with vision and recommendations, there's a little bit of history in there about the past. This IT department is relatively new, started in 2022, and we've done a lot of great work in that time. We've developed a highly skilled and efficient unit with strong leadership. There's a process of continuous improvement that is ongoing. We've tackled a lot of the dated hardware and software, and we continue to do more of that to keep pace with technology because it's always changing. And I believe that the IT department is ready to fulfill the vision of the council to integrate the charter departments. We have already expanded to support the fire department, and we've made really great strides in terms of consolidating smaller units that were kind of handling their own IT things over at DPW and at other departments and bringing them under the central IT umbrella. As far as what the benefits would be, I believe that the IT department will bring elevated technical expertise in terms of addressing issues and solving problems and being able to tackle technical issues. The ability to collaborate amongst the teams so that we have a variety of different expertise to pull in on different projects. Technically qualified supervision and goal setting from the IT department in order to make sure that technical personnel are being supported and being challenged in the correct ways. The fact that the different IT departments work in isolation doesn't necessarily benefit anyone. So being able to, pull in the correct people for the correct meetings, and then the ability for staff to cover for each other if we cross-train. So if, there's vacancies due to illness, or if somebody has a maternity or paternity leave, we can have coverage, not need to pull in additional resources or temp help in those situations if necessary. And then a big benefit would be the management of IT expenses and centralized reporting so that it would be easy to see all IT expenses in one place. And making sure that software purchases are being evaluated appropriately and that we're making sure we don't have redundant software. Purchasing discounts, because the larger of the purchase, we could potentially save funds. And identifying of redundancies could lead to further efficiencies. And as far as how to do it, my suggestion would be phase one would be police department IT integration. It's smaller, more manageable, and less dissimilar than the school department. And then once that was completed, we'd look at tackling the school department. And then key factors to success, authority being a big one, because in order to find the efficiencies, we have to be able to have the authority to supervise. And then budgetary control and responsibility. Obviously with the charter departments, it's a little different as far as budgetary, but the ability to put the funds where they need to be would be a huge aspect of success. And now I expect there's probably some questions.
Any questions?
Have you, as you talk about some of the redundancies and efficiencies that could be done. Have you been able to look at kind of like a high level of what you think are some of the, if we had a central SAT, some of the actual do you have any actual examples of where you feel like so far you've seen redundancies?
Until I could do a deep dive and really understand exactly what is going on at the charter departments, I wouldn't be able to give you specifics now.
And do we have, and this may be something we don't have on hand, or maybe we can kind of calculate, a total positions-wise of how many people we have throughout the charters and centralized, and kind of a role breakdown? I guess my question is, do we throughout the city have, say, 7 help desk employees, or how many, security, IT employees do we have? Or that may not be something you can give me, but maybe that is something that by the end of this, or as this committee reviews this and the council kind of looks at some of this too, we can kind of really get that information, because that would be helpful for me too.
I don't have that available right now. I know that there's 2 technical staff at the police department and 7 technical staff at the school department, because I looked at the budget.
Yep.
Yep, that sounds about right, but we can get it broken down more for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions?
Do you see opportunities to move off server-based equipment and into the cloud with maintenance contracts so that our software is always the latest?
That has been an initiative that the city's IT department has been championing, and we've been working towards. I think the big outlier right now is our financial system, which is being handled through the ERP process evaluation right now. And until I have insight into what's being done at the charter departments, I don't know, but that would continue to be a priority, to move off of on-prem infrastructure and move things to the cloud.
Right.
I wonder, I know the police department has to comply with some regulations that the rest of the city does not have to. And I think that's been a justification for having a separate department. I'm not sure that's a fully valid justification, but there are some considerations that we probably have to take in order to comply with, FBI,
Yeah,
Homeland Security, things like that.
I believe you're speaking of CJIS compliance, and that is definitely something that would need to be addressed, and that's something that the police department, is more probably are experts on, and so they can speak more to that. And I would envision that we wouldn't, the central IT department wouldn't take over entirely that responsibility, but we would supervise and work on that as a team to make sure we maintain those kind of compliances. It wouldn't be a matter of that central IT would completely take over the full responsibility of that. I would take over the full responsibility of that, but the people who are managing it directly would still continue to manage it directly, at least as I see it.
We've already integrated the fire department. What have we learned from that? Did we find redundancies? Did we find security issues?
We did. Like, for an example, the fire department has a lot of iPads that they use in the apparatuses, on fire trucks and ambulances that they have software installed on, where it provides them with, the details about a call, or things like even accessing like medications in an ambulance and things like that. And so the fire department was managing it themselves, and so we've brought them into our own management platform. So the IT department is now managing the iPads for them. So that was an example of, we had the same vendor, same essentially product. They were on different versions, but we were able to add them to the central IT's version, and it also freed up somebody at the fire department to not have to try to manage iPads.
Great.
I have a question on cybersecurity. I know that it's something that we've had as a particular focus at the city. And I've had some concerns because, you know, we have other departments and everyone having to manage cybersecurity is really a challenge without resources. Do you feel like integrating these other departments will help provide more security to those departments?
I do. I think cybersecurity's tough because it touches everything. And I think the ability to have, you know, high-level oversight and making sure that things are being done the correct way will make us a lot more secure.
Okay.
When we get into police, we go from IT that's used 9 to 5 weekdays or 8 to 5 weekdays. And, you know, if a sewer bill's a day late, it's not terribly critical, it's not ideal. But in the police environment, it's 24/7, and the dispatch is accessing information that's time critical. So how do we, give me your thoughts on that, moving into an area where you have to be always on?
Well, I would say that, you know, the fire department's in a similar situation, but we don't have the manpower for 24/7 coverage of all the departments. And so we don't have shifts in the IT department. And so the PD has 2 people. They don't, you know, I assume that they have very high availability. If there's an emergency that they report, and that would continue, that, you know, my phone, if it ever rings on the weekend or in the evenings, I'm working. It's not an option because I support, you know, public safety. And so those things don't wait until, you know, Monday morning to get taken care of, and I would expect that would continue. We do a lot with what we have. I think everyone would be on board with that. The expectation would continue that for public safety, that we will handle things as they arise.
Right, and I would assume,
Additionally, can I add, like, we rely on outside resources as well that provide some, fill in some of those gaps.
that's where it's
Yeah.
going, is I assume the vendors, software vendors, would
Well, and
help desks that are 24/7.
yes.
Are there other questions?
Do we have ongoing contracts with those organizations for support, or are they on call?
I know in the central IT department, you know, we have a lot of different contracts, but we have an outside resource through our, you know, tier 3 MSPs that provides services. So on the city side. Sure. Tier 3 meaning like you need an expert. And so they provide expert resources on, you know, based on the contract that we have in place. So if, you know, something happens, you know, I can call them up and put people on things really quickly. If it was, you know, obviously I don't have the insight into know exactly what the relationship would be with the PD, you know, in the future. But right now, if something big happens during off hours, I can call people who will put resources on a problem anytime.
Is that vendor specific, or is that a general support?
We have an existing contract with a MSP that provides that tier 3 support, so it's one organization.
And what's our practice with sewer and water? Those are also 24/7 and
Yeah, so
critical.
for example, just to like give you an example, there was an issue last summer with CrowdStrike. You might have seen it in the news, and the water sewer was hit with that problem. So it was 3 a.m. and I was in Madbury working out there to get that resolved. And so we put, you know, all the resources we had to bear on solving that problem as quickly as possible. And so that involved some outside resources, that involved the whole team with water sewer, getting together and solving that problem. And we leverage some outside resources as well that provide support for them. So I think it's kind of specific to the event, what kind of resources you need. So you can't, staffing 24/7 just isn't a reality in the city. So it's kind of marshaling the troops and divvying up the work as appropriately.
Yeah, no, I worked in a 24/7 environment. It was deadline critical, and we just had dedicated people who, and strong vendor support.
That's where support contracts become really important, maintaining those support contracts. So. But in a large incident too, it's like the CrowdStrike incident, there was no support coming directly from CrowdStrike. They had a lot bigger fish to fry,
But they're not
unfortunately.
gonna
Right.
Yeah.
I imagine this model is a little bit like in medicine. For example, my husband's a cardiologist, and there isn't a cardiologist at the hospital all night, but they're a phone call away, and they're there within 20 minutes if they're needed. So I imagine it's a similar kind of model that we're talking about. I have a question on, so my understanding is from the proposal that we're discussing, we're not eliminating the support that's already there. What we're doing is we're just adding an additional upper layer of support, essentially. So the two professionals that are in IT and the police department will continue to provide that support that they are currently providing, but there would be the additional layer of the overarching central IT to support them.
Correct. We're not talking about eliminating, we're talking about integrating.
Okay. Okay.
And I'll just add, the language is consistent with the charter. So it's kind of evolving, and it's a over time sort of goal. Yep.
Are there any other questions? All right.
I will say we do have Chief Newport here, Daisy Lavoie, also from the PD. I see Zach from the school here. We've got Chief McQuillan, who can speak to what he's done. I don't know if you want to hear from maybe the PD or their school first, and then maybe finish up with the chief.
I think I'm happy with whoever wants to come up next.
I would say if it's okay, we can bring the PD up.
That's fine.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Chief Mark Newport of the Police Department. This is Daisy Lavoie of our IT department. I think I've just got this and starting to review it. I think there's still a lot to take here. I think the first part is, as Ryan's already stated, they need to take a bigger dive into what actually the responsibilities they're trying to take over. And I think we're kind of putting the cart before the horse right now, because without knowing all that, I think to figure out what would work best, we need to review it, discuss it, and those discussions haven't happened yet. I think Daisy can speak on the IT piece way better than I can, so I'll let her say her comments on, what was presented today.
Integration's always good. You always want to share resources. We do share currently some resources with the city. Some of their third-party tier managed service providers we work with as well when we have things that are above our capabilities. And we do have different goals and different objectives. We are governed by the FBI CJIS requirements. So that takes up a big chunk of our time. They're always changing their roadmap. We go to many conferences and have to learn about what they want implemented. We do get audited by the FBI typically every 3 years. Due to COVID, they're a little behind schedule with auditing us. We've always successfully passed our audits. But now as technology and cybersecurity is evolving so quickly, things change on a daily basis. And it's a lot to keep up with those ever-changing sources. And the police department's not a boilerplate, IT department. I had to learn how to, reset batteries in a taser. We deal with the cruisers, 15 cruisers. We have a disaster recovery site. We need to make sure that that's always up and running for dispatch if we ever had to leave this building. So there's a lot of variables with our IT department that may not always fit in to generalization that just might be under the city's IT. We still have to work with the fire department because we share a CAD system. So I do get calls from them, on the weekends when something's not working, which is more prevalent to us than having Ryan or the city IT help desk look into that. So there's a lot of different variables in the police department that we have to account for. We are on our own domain. We went to our own .gov. We had to go to a G3 license under Microsoft so that we met CJIS recommendations. And some of those recommendations is that you're making sure that all that data in our email and our cloud is stored in the United States and that data center is protected and secured. And we manage our own email. We email our own email message audit. So if we need to do anything for Right to Know, we have, that's on us to provide. So, trying to think what else.
I mean, we're just completing the process of severing ourselves from the city's domain so that we're a separate entity, and that was for security purposes. So,
And that was recommended from CJIS, and when we had the Emotet virus back in 2018, it was recommended that we no longer share a flat network and that we go and be on our own domain. We also can't have a lot of things in the cloud, like our CAD RMS system. We did demo cloud versus on-site and what that would entail. We found that keeping it on-site gave us more control, especially if we needed to go to a disaster recovery situation. So we don't want to put our data in the cloud. We keep it here. We can back it up quicker. We can manage it. If we have to, if anything were to happen to it, we can bring it back quickly and make sure that we're up and running for public safety so nothing is, to wait on a vendor and ask them to do recovery, could take days. Whereas we have a backup process where we can bring up our CAD system within hours.
I guess for me, for understanding, because I'm not an IT person, it would be interesting to me to try to maybe collaborate and to figure out a matrix, because when we talk about public safety, I know there's a lot more informational data that needs to be secured on the police side versus the fire side, but there's also public service, I would assume maintenance that was being done as far as certain things in the truck and dispatch from the fire department, that now that it's become centralized through IT, they're servicing, our centralized is servicing that. So I would assume that there are some of those things, that are similar from police and fire that now our IT department is handling. And I would be interesting to see, again, a comparison more of from just the public safety, the two public safety networks, of how the ITs were operating, and maybe seeing what within that matrix could be dealt with on a centralized location. That to me would be an interesting comparison.
yeah, and like I said, I think we could look into all those things. I think the biggest difference between the police and the fire is the fire department's never had their own IT person.
Yeah.
So virtually Daisy, or IT department, has been the closest thing they've had to IT support, and it was just becoming too much, which was therefore, I'm not speaking on behalf of the fire chief, but he'll speak on them and pushing them. They needed more support, which they didn't have, and city IT was it, and that's
Yeah,
the resolution.
that's, I guess, what I'm looking to see is what, maybe I'm not saying this clearly, of what transitioned off of you into Central. So I can essentially have a before and after comparison of what was being done in support of the fire department that now is being handled by IT because they were relying on you.
Correct.
Does that make
Yes,
sense?
correct.
Yeah. Just to kind of I think we're all just looking at this. I know I feel like we keep using the word redundancies, and to me, I know when I hear that sometimes, because when we're talking about positions, we're talking about removing positions in payroll and X, Y, and Z, but more so to me, it's more of a fluidity that, like, you know, if the mayor decided he wanted to know something or the council requested information, it is a more clear channel of access versus saying, well, we can't really access that and we can't really access that. And so more so when I think redundancies, I think of like how information can be accessed, who it's accessed from, and so to make sure that we all understand, because I don't understand. And so if I don't understand as an elected official, I can't, you know, pass that on to our constituents in the community. And when we're talking about, especially, I think this was brought up and heightened when we're looking at figuring out a new facility of like, okay, well, if we're trying to do X, Y, and Z and you're, you know, asking for this square footage and it's this and it's that, so it's trying to be more, I truly don't love the word transparent because I think that insinuates that we're all hiding something, and I don't think anybody is, but more clear and simplified and understanding of who handles what and how it's handled and why it's handled that way. I understand that there are levels to FBI and protocol and safeties, especially in our really wonderful, I hate that we even have to have it, but crimes against children on the internet crimes and the senior internet crimes. And I don't think that those things are anything that I'm looking at like, hey, you know, Billy and the help desk can take over those roles. But it's maybe there we'll find through this audit type process that there's more redundancies in school than police, and you only have 2 and there's 7 and there's X, Y, and Z. But for me, it's really getting a matrix down of who does what, where does here, and what could be, you know what I mean? Does it make sense for your 2-person team to be overwhelmed with email addresses? Or does that make sense now that we're transitioning all to a .gov and X, Y, and Z, that thing is taken off the shoulders? So I just want to make it clear, my standpoint is redundancies don't necessarily mean, to me, removal of positions, but sometimes it's allocating needs and times and energies. So, but again, I think clearing out a matrix, and maybe that is you lovely folks in a room for a few hours hashing it out, but really getting a matrix of who's doing what, what's doing what, and why we feel like things can't transition or what we do feel like could transition.
Yeah, and I agree, the first step should be us all sitting down together and discussing that before we get to who's in charge of what.
Yeah. That was my piece.
There's the computer and there's the information in the computer. And the information in the computer, I think, is where the higher value is. I know, Chief, you wanted a crimes data analyst position. And, you know, all this information goes in as structured data with fields for what happened, when, where, who the officer was, what the, you know. And there's always somebody who's really good at working with that data. I don't know who it is.
We have
There's somebody
crime
that can
analysts.
talk to the computer and the computer talks to him. And but it seems to me that higher value of analyzing the data that you have, you know, if we have expertise in database in the IT department, if we have people who have degrees in that or skills in that, it could be more helpful. We could design queries, we could understand what we could extract from the database.
We have a person that does that now.
And I also work with that person and assist them when they need help pulling out data from our,
Every organization has that super user who just, you know, has developed the expertise over the years.
Yeah. So, and that's not, a piece that definitely falls underneath Daisy that she does. We have a person that's what they do. That's their full-time job, so, and it's integral because pulling all that information that I could pull it, she could pull it, you could pull it, and we get 3 different numbers, if not pulled the right way.
That's right.
So,
Right.
but everything we do is geared around that.
Yep.
Perfect. I guess one of my questions is, what could centralized IT do to support you? Like, where do you see places where you could use a little bit more support so that you can do more with your in-house people?
You want to answer that, Daisy? I mean, I guess what you have to understand is we have 2 people, so, Daisy does what Ryan and Patricia do, but she's also crawling on the desk and installing computers.
Yeah, I would say I'm, working manager. I do everything. I mean, we control the door access cameras, the building security, I dispatch the redundancy system over at Fire Station 2. Some of the things like taking the fire department, that was very helpful to integrate that.
The panic alarms. Everybody
Panic.
comes to Daisy for a panic alarm
Yes.
everywhere in the city, not just pertaining to the police department.
Yeah, we tried to collaborate on the door access, but I think we each felt that we needed to go our own separate ways because we have different schedulings and different needs since we're a 24/7 operation. I'd have to sit down and really think about some of the things. I mean, we do use the same managed service provider for them. When we moved to our own networking, we had some networking questions that we had to confer with them about, and but for the city itself, we're pretty independent of them right now, but it's always good to look and see what we can integrate.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, with only 2 people, I mean, there's a lot of work for 2 people in the police department, and where the city can provide more services for you on the IT side, that allows you to do more of the things that are really specialized to policing. And so that's where I'm thinking, that to me is that's what I think about when I think about efficiency, is that if we can provide those services that are not specifically specialized just to policing, then that allows you guys to do those services without straining the staffing that you have. And so that's where I think about efficiency, and not having to hire an outside contractor potentially to do that work for you. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good? Okay.
Good.
I'm good.
Thank you.
you.
Yes, thank you
Thank you.
both.
Checking with Zach.
Superintendent?
Buddy?
Hello.
So Zach McLaughlin, Superintendent of Schools, thank you for giving me just a few minutes. In terms of thinking about kind of the themes of what was spoken before, let me embrace a lack of redundancy and say everything the police just said I could echo. In addition to that, I think we were just having our budget conversation last week that included conversation with IT, and some of the things that stood out were that we've been around for a lot longer period of time. So Ryan was talking about 2022 is the kind of onset of city IT. We've existed for decades, our IT staff, and we have over 3,000 users that we're trying to manage and service. So I think, Chief hit on the idea that the deeper dive that Ryan was speaking to really probably is something that needs to occur prior to having a very clear change in this, if there's a clear change in authority in terms of who's making ultimate decision-making. And I do think there was a question around budgeting as well in that. But I think in what you heard Ryan say, there's a who gets to say no component of ultimately what this language is going to say. And I think that there's a richer conversation that we would all benefit from in advance of making a change. I don't have my IT team here. Our folks I really appreciate those giving the heads up on this last week, because we're just becoming aware, and I apologize that we don't monitor always what you guys are up to. But I do think there is a conversation to be had about operations and what this would mean for operations, and I appreciate the matrix idea. I think when all of us are in IT conversations, when our IT folks start talking beyond 30,000 feet, we all do a lot of nodding and smiling during those sections of the show. I think it would be, we all would be well served to really flesh out in a more detailed way that we can put down on paper what is happening with the staff that we have currently, and then what would be the vision for how that would evolve. And I don't know that has, I don't know that we've engaged in that conversation yet. And so I have some concerns about just moving ahead with the language without engaging in that dialogue. But everything else I can, similar to what Chief said. And I would say the other, you're also looking at information on language around human resources. And I think about that as a parallel to this. So one of the things that we work through is, I think, the charter talks about broadly about human resources having these functions across the departments, including the chartered departments. And there are some areas where it's really clear. Negotiations, very clear. Kelly's at the table when we do all the negotiating with our folks, onboarding of people in relation to benefit packages and stuff like that, all done through centralized human resources. And then it gets murky sometimes. And I think it's good to try to flush out some of this stuff. Things like who conducts investigations, depending on the type of things that is happening with a set of employees, murky right now. Not because of any of the personnel involved, just because those roles and responsibilities are not explicitly spelled out between the chartered departments and centralized human resources. I think about the same thing here, having a broad statement in IT where people might interpret what that broad language means in different ways after you put it into effect, and then we all walk away from the table, could be problematic. So all things to consider. I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I appreciate getting the heads up prior to this meeting.
Thank you.
Not necessarily a question. So I guess from here, my request would be that I know that we all are very busy, so I would put a broader date of like maybe 45 to 60 days if every of the charter heads can get into a meeting and kind of even just a basic matrix of kind of who, what, where, color coded, to kind of get back to this committee, because I know we all know it's going to come back up in budget. It has come back up in budget for the last 3 years. And so as we get heavy into our budget season and conversations, I think that this, again, is always something that is very heavy. It's something that's been on the mayor's initiative to try to figure out if more centralized or centralized segments of IT can look at buying power, cost, power, manpower. So I would put the request out to those in the room to, I think 45 to 60 days out to have something that can come back to this committee that can then go towards council and also be on included in the budget conversations. That no question. But I agree with you that as we look through the parallels of this and IT and some of the other things like purchasing and things like that, they're all going to run in somewhat a parallel conversation.
I'd be curious just what the list of IT functions that you have are.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you've got Google Classroom and Google Chromebooks, but what are the systems that you've got?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very simple. I mean, it's going to be lots of software, lots of different hardware that we service. Most of it is in-house, and so we service most of that in-house. And we actually think we've created efficiencies by not farming out everything to folks, and then we're doing similar to PD. It's things like door systems, and so I think the scope of what we do, I think, would surprise you. I think there'd be a bunch of things that wouldn't instantly come to mind, but I'd be happy to have my folks put together something that they can submit to all of you, or something we do collectively for all of you to consider as you kind of work through this.
So the city manager's office can make sure that this collective coming together happens, and we can kind of list out the positions and kind of like build in some ways off of kind of Ryan's, I think, intention and summary, which is how can we work better together, smarter, more efficiently? Because really it's really just how do we do it better? And where can we leverage each other? And as we're finding out across departments, to the extent that there are opportunities to cross-train and to be able to support each other more effectively, that doesn't hurt anyone, so.
I think the assistant mayor's suggestion of 45 to 60 days is reasonable. That way we don't delay the discussion of the changes for too long.
Correct, yep.
Okay. Are there other questions?
And I know the fire chief is here.
Yeah, but I think also as part of that, just a list of the systems in each of the charter departments
Sure.
and what they do and how many users they have or something like that.
Yep, I think those are easy things for us to turn around.
Okay.
So.
And I think one of the challenges for schools in particular is around cybersecurity and user access with all the
Totally
young
unique
people.
data stuff. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So I have some questions
Yeah.
around that, given all the young people that have access and, phishing and those issues become particularly challenging, I would think,
They
for
do.
the schools. So, okay. I think-
Great. Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Chief, last but certainly not least.
Good morning. Whoops, sorry about that, Council. Bill McQuillan, Fire Chief. So thank you for having me this morning. I'm here to talk a little bit about our experiences in the fire department. I will preface this by saying I'm not an IT person. I know a lot of things. One thing I don't know is I don't know what I don't know, and this is one of those areas. And I think right from where we sit, there's two sides to this coin. There's the administrative side for me as a department head to be able to figure out where we're going, what we're doing, and how we function, and then operationally, where essentially we want stuff to work for people. And ultimately, I think for us in the public safety realm, that's what we want, is we just want the stuff to work and work right. We're a little bit of a hybrid in that, as Daisy and Chief Newport mentioned, we're on the police department's network for a variety of things, specifically the radio system and our reporting system through the record management system. As the CAD issue comes up, that's housed, in the police department in their realm. So we have a working relationship with them as well. But I think for me, this begins during the budget process for FY25, the current fiscal year we're in, where we had an original proposal to bring in an IT person to help us manage these things. Typically what we were doing is we were giving people administrative duties on top of their normal duties to manage different things, and it wasn't working for what we were doing. And then during the budget process, there was a conversation that was had between myself and Ryan that perhaps we could do a better job if they managed our IT stuff. So from where I sit as an administrator, for us it worked in that we were able, while we're the smallest of the departments, right, and that's part of this too, I recognize, we were able to make sure that our folks, beginning, last July, right, that our email and our basic functionality was up and running and on the cloud, right, through the implementation of the 360 product, and we had a little bit of a different challenge in the fire department with respect to, we have people working at different places each and every day. So they had multiple work sites, and we had to figure out a roaming profile sort of thing to be able to get that accomplished and get our people up and working on the system, which we were able to do. Another area where the IT folks were able to really lend their expertise and leverage it in savings as well was we had a capital project around building security, and as a result of that, where to go to bid, how to bid it, and what we wanted ultimately, right? Again, this is one of those areas, I don't know what I don't know. And this was an area where, as a fire chief, I don't have the expertise, right? And that the IT department did, and that they were able to figure out that we could expand upon an existing program that existed here at the at City Hall and the police department, and we could integrate it and expand that system to the 3 buildings, which was successful. Another area where we were able to take advantage was we had a radio system upgrade. So through the grant process, we got new self-contained breathing apparatus that had a couple of functional features that we weren't sure how to take advantage of, and specifically around Bluetooth technology to our radios, and on a repeater system on the units themselves, and a tracking device to be able to monitor them in real time with respect to their air consumption. And this is where, again, the rubber hits the road, and we were able to have somebody else look at it and tell us, this is the direction you need to head, and this will work, and this is how. So not to get too far into the weeds, but that's where it worked. Another subject that we talked about, or was talked about before I got up here, was the iPads and our reliance on the police department for the CAD system. And this is an area where we had some products that we'd been using previously that were third-party applications, and we weren't sure if they were the right solution for us and if iPads were the right solution. And holes in the system with respect to what our folks could and couldn't see in the rigs. And IT helped us figure out what was the best sort of model that we should be using to be able to get the data in real time and be able to use it. Then when it comes to emergency management, where when we open up the EOC with respect to the Seabrook station drills, we have a couple of practice sessions, and during one of the early on practice sessions in the last cycle, we figured out that we had some significant challenges out at Fire Station 2 in the EOC, where we had people's cell phones that wouldn't work and where their laptops wouldn't work, and they couldn't connect. And again, this is where IT was able to step in, figure out what the problem was, and repair it instantly so that we could get a functional EOC up and running, and then be able to build a redundant network, so to speak, for the EOC, so that in the event that something were to happen, that we had a backup system in place, which was actually a FEMA requirement, so we were able to get that done. And then on the human resources portion of this, presently we use human resources for our recruiting and our candidate application, but what we also do use HR for is sort of a checks and balances, that when our new folks are onboarded and they come on, before they actually start, they're going for a background check, and they have to pass a certain physical as mandated by the state, and those results are managed by the HR department, and then they let us know, that Bill McQuillan, candidate for the job, is ready to go, cleared background, cleared his physical. So we have those sort of processes in place with HR. We just don't have them memorialized. So I know the superintendent spoke about that, and I think that's probably a good idea, is perhaps to drill down a little bit and get these things memorialized. But I'm happy to take any questions you may have. But I think when we talk about these ideas, I know you can look at me and point to my department as a success story when it comes to IT and centralizing things. We're very happy. Granted, we were coming from a state where we didn't have any IT support, and using the outside vendors that the city previously had, and trying to get things done was a real challenge. The 24/7 challenge hasn't been an issue for IT. We've been able to accomplish it, and they know, our folks are on a 24-hour schedule, and that if they don't get back to them within that day, they're going to lose them for a few days. So it's, go to the front of the queue, so to speak, so that we can get the issues addressed. But I'll be happy to take any questions you might have.
Yeah, I'm interested that you were attempting, at least, to use roaming profiles. And I wondered, if that's something that could be broader in the city as a whole.
I'm not the guy to ask that.
No, it's directed to, but
Yep.
you brought it up.
Sure.
Maybe, I don't know, if you want to jump in on that?
I think we've kind of have more success just giving people laptops because cost-wise, there's not much variability between a laptop and an actual desktop computer anymore. So a laptop allows somebody to have that ability and they just carry it around with them. But a lot of the people at the fire department don't have a dedicated computer, so it's just a different use case. So I would say, citywide roaming profiles probably not a great solution to like expand wide. But in certain particular use cases, I think we look at all the options and choose what's best.
And I wonder, like, for the police department, if, when people have to come into the office to create reports and stuff like that, is that a model that could work there? Maybe another.
Remote work at the city is probably very different than remote work at the police department, I'd say.
I can answer that question. So all our shared computers, we have report writing, which is used by our patrol officers. We use a public desktop feature, so everyone has the same icons and accessibility. We used to use roaming profiles back in many, many moons ago. But we since have gotten away from that, from the recommendation of cybersecurity, because if you have something that's bad on your profile and then you go to another computer and it comes over, it goes with it. I'm sure roaming profiles have come a long way since the day that we've used them, but we stopped that practice of roaming profiles because you don't want to infect other computers and bring other things with it. So that's, I don't know if Ryan's...
Yeah, my experience is 6 years old now. I retired 6 years ago, and I don't.
Yeah, roaming profiles, I think, in general, is kind of like an old way of doing it. Now that things have moved more cloud, there's just less need to do that stuff. It involves a lot of copying of like files back and forth, so it kind of has overhead that's unnecessary.
And Microsoft Windows has made a more public user, is what they call it now. So we use those type of tools so that everyone has the same access on the same computer to keep those resources mainstreamed.
And the other question I have is laptops, and if they're being carried around on planes, on buses, on, trains, on wherever, coffee shops, doesn't that imply a level of security risk?
Yes, there definitely is a risk that's involved with laptops because they can be, lost or stolen, or, I think that the boogeyman of public Wi-Fi is always a concern. But I think because we have things like multi-factor authentication enabled, we have, so one thing you run into is like token theft where somebody can impersonate you. We have really short token lifetimes, so those things expire in a short period of time, so that the hope is that they expire before somebody could use them. And then also we have a lot of things built in, so like nobody can sign into the city 365 environment from outside the United States. So things like that help us, where they would just not be allowed to sign in at all if they're outside the U.S. And we have a new policy at the city where we don't let people travel outside the United States with city hardware.
And like Ryan said, we use an endpoint management on our cell phones and our laptops. So if there was something that was compromised, we can control it and erase that laptop remotely. One of the CJ's recommendations is going to YubiKeys, where you insert a device, you know something, you have something, is kind of what they're requesting us to do now. So you have to have a physical key to log in with your Windows login, two-factor authentication. So those types of things have been rolling out and have been providing greater protection for things that are out in the world.
do our public safety folks have separate work cell phones, or are they using their?
Well, technology in the police world is changing really fast. So right now, our ranking staff and our admin staff have cell phones provided to them. We're on the AT&T FirstNet network. But now that we're going to a lot of cloud-based software and applications, officers are going to need their own cell phone. We have tasers now, body cameras. Axon has all these tools and resources for the officer to use through the cell phone, uploading their body cam and tagging it appropriately, and the taser information, and making sure that that information gets uploaded appropriately. Two-factor authentication is on everything now. The officer really needs to have that ability to authenticate on a work phone and not their personal phone. So those types of things are coming out. Our policy management, we use Power DMS. If an officer needs to read up on policies, the cell phone is the way to go now. Checking his days off now is in the cloud. He needs to check that on the phone. We, of course, do have laptops in the cruisers, but it just makes their workflow easier. I mean, the cruiser and the laptop in the cell phone is their office.
I just add to that, that with all the new technology that's coming out in the police department, we are in the process of getting all sworn police officers cell phones for that reason, because a lot of the equipment that we use now with, like she said, the tasers, the body cams, everything we have is, a lot of it's app-driven, and it needs to be on a cell phone. And right now, we have cell phones in the cars for the officers when they're working on that, but, it's not the same as if each person, because that car may have multiple officers on there, or one officer needs that phone because they're working on something on there. It's just going to be more manageable for each officer to be assigned a phone and work in that process. So probably before the end of this budget, we will have them.
Yes, our public safety software also has an app where officers can run information right from their phone when they're on scene. So just more and more of this type of technology is evolving.
Great,
And these devices are necessary.
How does that work for the fire department?
So we have the iPads on all of the trucks and ambulances as well. We have a series of different apps that are on there for them to use, and they can also use the device as a cell phone, specifically to contact medical control in the ambulances. We have 2 iPads in each ambulance. One is a mini, so that they can actually get online and be able to talk with medical control and speak to the doctor while they're on scene or en route, because there are certain procedures and drugs that require online medical control and a direct consultation with the physician.
Chief, and do you have future planning set up? We just heard a little bit about kind of the transition that the police department is looking to go to, and their forward thinking, and how does that pertain with the fire departments?
So we've been with the city IT since, last July, essentially, with respect to this. So we just had a meeting with IT and their staff to be able to talk about, these are the products that we use, this is how we use them, and this is, what we're trying to get out of them. Is there a better way to do these types of things? Are we using the right tools for the job? Is there a better way, so to speak? Like, again, I know what I know, and I don't know what I don't know. And so to have the experts come down and, look at what we're using and say, that's a good solution for you, or there's a better way, is certainly helpful for me, because I can budget next technology with respect to defibrillators and fire pumpers and that sort of thing. But when it comes to IT, I'm flying blind, and that's where I need them.
Thank you.
Okay. I personally really appreciated the comments about memorializing the way that you work with HR in hiring. Is there an effort at the city to do that, to memorialize how each charter department works with HR?
I'll have to speak to the director because I don't know how much she has documented in her own maybe internal department about here's how you handle X. But I think we can follow up on that and see. And if we need to, we can bring Kelly Harper here for another conversation.
I think that's one of those things that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I just add to the HR piece, like Zach said, is just kind of what this language is actually trying to say. It changed because obviously the police department background is far different than a regular city background investigation. I mean, we've had our own HR that works hand in hand with the city HR, but there's different pieces that we have to handle in-house that the city doesn't do generally on a routine hiring that we're required to do. There's a lot of laws and a lot of records and stuff that we have to keep pertinent to police employees.
That's fair. And I know, as superintendent's come up, I know when I had to get my background checked for my teaching license,
Sure.
I had to go to the police department to be fingerprinted and to go through that process. So I'm assuming something similar is challenging for schools.
Yeah, there's a variety of things. There are times where there is clear overlap that's really easy, and there are other times where it's just not. It doesn't always apply. Similar to Chief, some of it might be the same. Where there's things that we handle with non-HR in-house staff within the charter department. But I do think it would benefit, and that memorialization that Chief McClellan's talking about probably looks slightly different from charter department to charter department. But I do think it would be a worthwhile exercise.
So what I'm hearing is if we go to this language, what we need to make sure we're doing is make sure we have all the backup documentation for how this actually is working and how it should continue to work on the part of all the departments, rather than just making assumptions or having anyone guess as to what the language actually means.
Well, and I think figuring out how a centralized IT is an umbrella, as maybe instead of having to pull you in for a meeting or having to pull IT in, there's a report, for me at least as a counselor, sometimes it's, most staff know, like, I can't just go up to you and ask you for a report. I have to go through the city manager and then to the chief and then to you. But sometimes, with department heads, it's a little bit easier for me to walk in with Susan or Suzanne or Susan or Karen or the city manager or whomever to a department head. And so I think what I'm looking at from an operational stance, which is different than how I think the day-to-day operational stances. And so what I want to make sure is that we're not looking for something that adds ease to one end but a stressor to the other. And so figuring out how I think on a personal note, right, the chief knows and I knows, harassing emails, that should be for me something very easily that if it shouldn't be work for my city government email to be accessed to then be sent over to the police department. That should be a very swift, something that is addressed in a very easy way. And I think that separation of so much of our department, for me as the outsider, don't always understand why we can't speak internally more fluidly. And when I say internally, I mean like tech internally. So again, I think getting that matrix broken down and translating to us who are looking at adapting language in the charter, why or why not this could work, or where the stress points, if any, this would enact, is really kind of what I'm hoping that we get out of this. And if we find out that it's tips one way versus the other, or X, Y, and Z, then we go from there. I hope that was clear.
I would just like,
Yes, that's clear.
I would like to say that this right now, with everybody at the table, has been very informative. And so this is great. And maybe this is the first meeting of something that can come through.
I think this is
Collaborative effort.
Yeah, this has been a very helpful discussion from our perspective, because when we're trying to update the ordinances so that they fit current practice, and that so that they work for us for the next 20 years. So, so if there are changes, that the ordinance doesn't have to change. So that is incredibly helpful. I think that the assistant mayor's suggestion that we spend 45 to 60 days gathering information about IT would be incredibly useful here before we make any changes to the IT language in particular. But I also think that it would be important then for this committee to hear from Kelly Harper in HR to see what we can do to make sure we get the HR language memorialized, that we get all the background information memorialized for the HR language as well, so that there's no concern about changes to the HR language. So if we can do that, maybe we can invite her to our next meeting if it's possible.
I'm going to dig down, then get down to finance.
And I wanted to thank you all for spending so much time with us today. I think we're done asking questions, and we'll get back to this language in a few months then on IT. And we'll talk to Kelly about HR language and figure out what we need to do there then.
Can I ask you one follow-up?
Yes.
Which is, what is the information, I understand there's a certain extent to which city staff will coordinate some, but what is the information that's going to be most valuable to you for us to come back with? Because that can take a lot of different shapes.
For me, I would like essentially act like you're teaching me a new language of what is a basic workflow. I'm not looking for integral, like this is how many hours it takes us to create new email addresses every year for students and us purging X, Y, and Z, but a general outline of like, if you were almost doing your job postings, sometimes that's literally how I learned some of the roles in the cities. I go on the city's job posting and I'm like, oh, that's what this person kind of does. So kind of a matrix of that. And then we know there's going to be certain things like every department has their own type of version of a basic help desk. Well, what is covered under your basic help desk? And then things that aren't covered under your basic help desk that get elevated to a level higher of a personnel. Literally breaking it down as almost like a rating system of like, if this is a basic average problem that we see 15 times a week, this is who handles it, and this is where we feel kind of where that responsibility lies within our department. And for me, again, it would be really nice, the add-on to the police would be the things that we're taking care of, you know what I mean, for the fire that were then offloaded onto centralized IT. And it would be interesting, too, to get kind of now that, as the chief said, we're a little over a year into, right, it was 23, right? Or 24. So now, we're 6 months in, to that, figuring out how IT, without more, physical FTE resource has handled that increased volume of need. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and
does. Yep.
I'm particularly looking for where do you see that having additional IT support from the city could benefit you, and where do you see kind of that cross-pollination between departments? What can be done or shared?
I'd like to speak to that. I know you guys are trying to centralize, which, I'm agreeable to that as well. But you also got to remember, we were shared resources with the city, and because we had different goals than them, we had to go away. And sometimes being on our own island is an efficiency. The city doesn't need to buy some of the high-level licenses that we do, because we're a government entity and we have to be in compliance with the FBI CJIS recommendations. So, having our email where it's only 120 people being on the specific E3 license, the city doesn't have to be. They can be in more commercial grade. I don't know what their plans are going to, if they're going to an E3 but there's whole different tiers. So you have to think about, Microsoft is changing their whole tier of how they license things to local and municipalities, and the differences on how they work. So it wasn't efficient for the city to go and get everybody on this, where the license was more expensive.
Yeah, I just think what you just said, though, highlights where I feel like my biggest issue is the lack of communication within. It should not be a mystery whether the city is going to go to a M3 level email. Like, that should be a conversation that, whether it's the leadership within that department is all having a conversation, because it may be an idea that they are thinking of going to, and you're like, hey, here are the pros and cons of this. So again, well, I think that centralized may seem chopping heads, one boss, X, Y, and Z. In my view, it is centralizing some of the communications that we have as it concerns to IT. As the chief has said, talking about these are our future plans, buying power X, Y, and Z with their transition. I think that getting people in a room to talk about these things is the best, because we may, the police department may have learned something through the FBI and the CGIS about certain Chromebooks being more susceptible to hacking in cases that are happening in other school districts around the country. Well, that information should be shared in a fluidity, in a fluid way, in a constant
And
way.
really, I feel like that's coming together.
Yeah.
Because now we have the NIST requirements, the CISA.
Yeah.
We have all these new technology branches that are kind of making all these regulations so that all IT can look at these and say, is this FIPS compliant?
Yeah.
Is this encrypted? So we kind of we have those standards and those guidelines federally for all IT.
Yeah. And
not
just making sure
CJIS. Yeah.
the laymen get to understand it, so that when we're in meetings like this, you can be like, no, we're all covered. We all know. Here we go. Here's our
Yeah, and
checklist
the
that we
city
talk
is
about.
very well aware of that. So.
Yeah.
Right.
Awesome.
And hopefully we find efficiencies in like hardware purchases, and in, that's where I see the opportunity for efficiency, hardware purchases, software purchases, where maybe the schools use a particular software and particular hardware, but if we can combine that hardware with another hardware purchase, we can get a bulk purchasing discount, even if it's not exactly the same hardware. So that's where I always think about us finding some efficiency, and where maybe one department's using a system that another one would benefit from, instead, that we haven't thought about yet. So hopefully we can kind of figure some of that stuff out in the next 45 to 60 days. I know we can't figure it all out. That's a long process, but at least we can get a kind of a general framework of where we are. So,
Okay.
yeah, does that make sense?
Yes.
And
Sorry,
then-
I was okaying myself, because we all know that I
I
can.
think from my point of view, it may not be necessary for us to have, but somewhere in this deep look into it, just a list of the systems your people in schools support, and a list of the systems, Diane, your two people support. There's CAD, there's door locks, there's
I
radios.
believe Finance now requires us to do a GASB spreadsheet.
They
which
do.
outlines
Okay,
all of
so it
these.
already exists.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That works. Great. Thank you. Again, thank you all for spending so much time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll go on to talk about encumbrance permits. Our next, I imagine most of you don't want to be here for that.
My dear, my chairwoman, I
have to run.
I have to run.
It's okay. We're just starting our discussion on this.
Yes.
I assume we will wrap it up at our next meeting, would be probably the serious discussion and answers to all of our questions will come at the next meeting.
Yep.
Because we really rely on Attorney Farini, who cannot be here.
On the other hand, to the extent you are prepared to kind of weigh in generally on your thoughts on costs, really, it is less about changing the verbiage in the ordinance, because, yep, that's legal work and requires some noodling out about how to organize it. But most importantly, because you have the fee committee, which is meeting in the near term, yes, thank you, as well as development of the budget, we actually think to the extent you all can weigh in on costs, and what your kind of current, at least, inclination is, or what additional information you want to decide on fees. Because the writing can take place afterwards. The money and how much we charge or don't charge really is key in terms of timeliness from our point of view. So did you all see the little spreadsheet in the very back? I
Yes,
have
and I-
extra copies.
Shared it on the screen for those people at home who are watching. I know it's hard to see.
It's okay.
Okay.
So that is, if we had a request and an ask of you, it would be, we'd love to get your sense on the fee component first, knowing that we will work and build around
Amounts.
whether it's free or not free.
Yeah, that's one thing, but then amounts is another, I guess, because our amounts should reflect the actual cost.
That will get handled in the fee committee. What would be helpful is to know, because there's been some discussion about whether to charge or not charge,
Yes,
that is kind of the key piece, and then we can evolve that conversation of what the charge is. I think the general thought is you don't touch outdoor dining or public street or sidewalk, because you guys wrestled with that last year.
Yeah.
We seem to be in a okay
Got it
place.
standardized, so
Yep.
it's
Yes.
square feet or square feet.
Yep. So just knowing that, yep, you concur that we should not touch that and leave that in would just be good.
Yeah, I don't think.
Same.
Restaurants
that's-
are
Right,
booming
we
at all.
know.
I don't think we want to be.
Well, so is that including the community space public, or is that just the fenced-in outdoor dining space?
Just the outdoor dining fenced-in spaces.
Okay, so not the table, chairs, encumbrance.
So if you look at the chart, do you want a hard copy? Is it?
No, I can.
Okay, you can see it well enough. All right.
So
So you've got
I'll blow this up a little
what
bit
I'd call
more.
outdoor dining in community space.
Yes.
So that's a different bucket.
Right.
You have outdoor dining on a private street. Then you have sidewalk obstruction table. I'll jump a little bit here.
Yeah.
You see that normally we have been charging the sidewalk obstruction, tables, benches, chairs, planters, those
Yes.
kind of things.
Right.
That's your $75 each, $10 each for a chair.
Yeah.
And then you've got your sidewalk obstruction. Waive last year, when it was in a community space, that was Mark McNabb's space.
Yeah, that was the council voted last year
Yep.
to waive
Did not.
the changes.
I don't believe that was a unanimous vote.
Well, but
I understand.
the council voted to waive the fee for community spaces.
Yep. Well, for his community space.
For his
So the-
community space.
Right, so the question would be, do you want to make that a general proposition?
Practice, or is that not
So this,
practice?
so this is where I struggle with, especially when we talk about this specific location, because yes, it is community space, but then could you not also deem some of the other places that do not use roped off outdoor dining as community spaces? You know, I look at my business for years, we had benches out front that we paid our annual fee, and people were able to sit on those, and they were community benefit. Yes, we somewhat benefited, but they were also a community benefit. So where do we draw the line of where does community space then start to impact our sidewalk obstruction? And
So let me take that up. So hypothetically, because these are all policy decisions. So you could, because I know there's lots of interest in the outdoor dining, public seating, you could decide that, subject to still a permit process, so we can make sure there's no impairment on, ADA accessibility, et cetera, you could decide from a policy perspective, we think outdoor dining and outdoor seating is a priority, and consequently, we do not want to charge an administrative charge for those tables and chairs, provided, again, you just do a permit process so we can make sure it's compliant. And so that would, you could make it blanket, and it could cover community space easements, because that's what one type of interest is, regardless of the owner. And it could cover, where we used to have, so the space that's actually in the city right of way, near your shop, along with, I always think of, because I go to Ceres Street a lot, the tables and chairs that just used to be right along
Yep.
the building. So don't charge for those, because that's just on the public
Bagel
sidewalk.
shop.
yeah,
Yep.
the Maison.
Yep,
The Maison
exactly. You
Navarre.
can list off all those businesses that just have a couple of tables and chairs pushed up against the building so that they don't interfere with the right-of-way. And if you decided that those were a priority, and you wanted to waive the fee, then that is something that you could recommend. Or you can continue to do it on a case-by-case basis, but I think in the ideal world, we'll write the ordinance either way in terms of how we handle this, and then you just adopt each year whether you're going to charge a fee or not, depending on your policy preferences.
I know.
That fee used to be, number one, the fee used to be very high. You paid it. I thought it was high.
I thought it was a doable fee when you compare it to operational fees compared to like your annual occupancy fee, your liquor license fee, your things like that. I felt like it was a fairly assessed fee, and a fee that the city doesn't always. I don't see people going around when you see these A-frames out on the sidewalk or on some of the retailers that put clothing racks on. I think the city is very fair with how it, I've never seen anyone penalized for having a clothing rack outside and not having a $75 encumbrance fee. So I could be wrong, but in my years of being downtown, I've never seen somebody get a penalty. They may have gotten a talking to say, hey, you have to get this.
Yes.
But I've never seen like a penalty fee assessed.
We generally don't penalize as
Yes.
long as people then undergo and undertake the process to get a permit, and it's actually someplace where it's allowed to be and not interfering with the
I guess
passage of pedestrians.
somewhat of my mindset on this, and then I do apologize, I have to give my opinion and then leave, is that as we're looking at, I'm taking this kind of from another point of view also, as we're looking at some updating of Market Square, one of the main focuses that we are looking at adding is more community seating on, say, the north side of North Church, where the sun hits more, and looking at all of that. And while I don't want to penalize financially anyone feeling like they are providing public space or a public benefit, the city is looking at making sure it picks up that delta of what the community is missing. So the city's already looking at that investment, and where do we give it away for free because we think it's a community benefit? I would compare it to sports. The children's sports leagues are a community benefit, and those are not free because they have costs, and they have costs associated with them. So I think that anybody, including myself, big, small, large businesses that want to do something, understand that there is a cost associated with that, whether there's a community benefit or not. There's many times you can go to any shop, including my own, and they have a croissant from Elephantine and a coffee from mine, or you go to La Maison and they have a coffee from my shop and a crepe from there, or you go to Hearth and they have a sandwich from there and a coffee from Elephantine. And so there's kind of a roaming benefit to it, but I don't think that any one business can say that like they are providing the biggest outdoor impact. My perception, and I know this may not be popular, and we talk about Hearth because they were the ones who were waived last year. I did not support it last year. I would not support it again today. I think that if you know what the fee is when you decide to purchase chairs and tables, you know what the fee is when you decide to do a general impact. And I would be interested to see what the number is last year, what that fee would have been, and kind of what that, maybe it's a small revenue line of $1,700, but I would be interested to see what that would be.
As I recall, we had that number, and it came up in the city council vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like 6,000?
Yeah.
I don't remember it.
I can certainly look it up and bring it back for the next meeting, but it was fairly substantial number, as I
really
recall,
substantial.
because they had a lot out.
Yeah.
I don't share the assistant mayor's view. And the reason I don't is that people are already investing money in the tables and chairs, in benches, in planters, and all of these things benefit the community and beautify the downtown space. And what I hear from businesses and restaurants is that they're being nickeled and dimed to death by the city. That's what I hear every time I talk to a downtown restaurant or business owner, is that the city just charges more fees and more fees. Every time they want to do thing, it's another fee. And they're all struggling. And, you know, we're really, downtown is really struggling right now. We're losing a lot of businesses. And it's not necessarily rent increases. Everyone keeps saying it's rent increases. There are a few that are. It's not across the board the problem. The problem is we have a decline in shopping and tourism downtown. So with that decline, we're seeing businesses really suffering. And we want people to go downtown. We want to encourage people to go downtown and shop and to go to businesses. And I think that aside from spaces where you rope off the space and dedicate it to your own business, where you're going to serve your food and no one else is allowed there, anytime a business is willing to provide a space for people to sit, or a planter that looks beautiful and makes the city look nicer, or provides a bench, they're providing a service to the community already, and we shouldn't be charging them for it. And so that's my general perspective on this. That's why I argued last year for Hearth, the enclosed space that they have that is private dining space for their restaurant, they should absolutely be paying for. But all the public tables and chairs, I don't think that they should be paying for. And I honestly don't understand legally, and I would want to see the documents to figure this out, the difference between a public easement on a sidewalk space outside of Hearth and the public easement on the private street that we have over where Row 34's dining is. Because their dining space completely blocks the sidewalk, where there is no access for individuals walking through there. And my understanding is that the city has an easement there as well. So I don't understand why that one is treated so differently from the other spaces. And it must be somehow the legal documents were drawn up differently, but I don't think we should be treating them differently. They're both privately owned spaces where the city has easement for sidewalk passage, and they're both privately maintained spaces as well. So I want to encourage people who build anything, redevelop anything downtown to provide public space, and I don't want to penalize them by charging them money when they provide seating in the public space that's available for everyone, or flower boxes or planters, and so I also question A-frames. You know, why do we charge so much for an A-frame? You know, why do we charge for somebody who's putting a rack out? You know, like, so I think that all of that encourages tourism and business. And I think we need to be supporting our businesses rather than charging them fees when it's not necessary to charge them a fee. So that's where I stand. You know, I'd rather that the city just take on that responsibility of permitting those things, knowing that it's a few pennies on the dollar for the taxpayer, but that we have those services in place. So.
I don't disagree with the thought behind what you're saying. I do completely agree with that. I struggle as the fiscal stewards of our city, and I understand that we have a very hard job of balancing our residents, our taxpayers who maybe are not residents, our businesses who maybe do not own but are tenants, and therefore we have a really hard time balancing all of that. But I guess what I would look at is if we could get maybe I apologize, it would have to be like a 5-year summary, like 19, because I feel like we can't look at 2020, 2021 were weird years, but looking at for just these fees, what the city has collected in revenue. I say 5 years because I feel like 18, 19 are going to be truer years than 2021. Even with things just like A-frames, because if we do get those numbers and it looks like it is, $500 a year, okay. You know what I mean? But if we look at some numbers and we're starting to see that it's $20,000 a year, well, I mean, then I feel like that we have to look at a bigger impact of our budget. Well, I know 20,000 is a very finite line. That is, you know, a third of or that's a third to a half of a paraeducator.
Well, since we're both on fees, is that possible to have by Wednesday?
I will see. I know we
I'm not on
had
this.
previously, I think,
Beth
pulled
is-
some of the numbers. So let me see what I can do.
Okay.
Let me see what I can do.
You had me thinking, I'm like, am I on fee?
No.
No, I think it's Josh, you, and Beth.
And Beth, yeah.
Yeah.
I knew it would have been expanded.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, a lot depends how the data is stored,
And how much-
or
I
whether
mean-
we've pulled it before. We might, and Jane might already have it. So.
I think we have some of it. I'm not sure we date all the way. I know that we have year over year because the EDC asked for it when we were looking at, because the EDC recommended increasing fees based on staff,
Actual cost.
on national
Yeah.
costs, on staff impact time, and setup costs, X, Y, and Z for outdoor dining, not necessarily for the sidewalk encumbrance. But, so I know we have some of that data because that was given to the EDC.
By the way, Mark McNabb's letter that we did vote on, he claimed that it would cost him $6,000 a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, for the cafe tables, you know, how much work is involved? Like, if they just send us a photo and we approve it, how do we say that there's a lot of city cost and time?
I will say this, think about the role that our enforcement officer, Jason Page, does. A lot of it is going out and checking to see, you know, has
what I was
the
wondering.
sign migrated
Yes.
beyond where it is supposed to
That
be placed?
happens on Commercial Alley all the time.
Yeah.
Yes, and so those are the types of pieces that when you set up a permit structure, there's not just the processing. We kind of, you think about it, there is an enforcement piece. But like I said, it really comes down to policy and priorities and kind of that balance of what you want to achieve and the cost related there too. And, you know, we are moving to more online permitting to kind of reduce make it easier for residents and businesses to just go online at their computer and fill out the form. But also from our staff point of view, there is more that you can do. Okay, looks like everything's here, they've checked all the boxes, and it's a little easier to administer up until you actually go out on the street and see, well, did they do what they said they would do, and are they still doing it the right way?
You know, I think one of the challenges on enforcement is that our enforcement staff doesn't work certain hours. And so we can say we enforce things really well, but it's challenging at best, and it doesn't always happen. And what
Unless
we
you have a nosy neighbor.
yeah, we rely on our businesses and our, you know, people who pull these permits to follow the rules. And we ask them to do that because we care about our community. So
Yep.
in some ways, we just have to emphasize that because I don't think that we actually end up with that much enforcement. Because he's also extremely busy looking at permits for inspection. So,
Yep.
so we don't, yeah.
Right.
Right.
Doing a $100 million construction project inspection versus a couple of.
Well, I was thinking of Jason Page, who's usually helping with, you know, a whole variety of tasks, and when he drives by, he notices and brings it, calls out
Thank
what needs to be
you.
corrected.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the challenge, though. You know we don't have someone all the time,
Right.
and especially when outdoor dining is usually most utilized.
Yeah.
We don't have someone. The A-frames maybe a little different, but they seem to show up more on the weekends.
Yes, they do.
Which again is more of a challenge for enforcement, but this is kind of one of those. This is a challenging issue. I would love to see the difference, the definition changes between easement community space that's privately owned and
I probably,
private street.
I will grab those the requisite legal documents. When we did, because I've been here so long, and it's not me, but when Attorney Sullivan worked on the documents for Port Walk Place, that, as I recall, preceded the whole notion, if you will, of community space easements. So that was community space easements were a later development, is my recollection.
Okay.
So I think that's part of the, the thinking evolves over time, but I'll pull that and see if I can highlight the sections that
Okay.
explain why there are differing rights in different spaces. So,
And I think that that's critical too, because places like the music hall were charged considerable amounts of money last summer for usage of space in front of their building based upon the outdoor dining ordinance, even though it wasn't outdoor dining. And it's very easy to define that as community space and to think of that differently, and to look at,
Public-private partnership.
that's right, and to look at our other ordinances that actually say we don't charge nonprofits, we can waive fees on nonprofit organizations. So I think it's important that we're really clear as to what these definitions are in every single space in the downtown, because I think that some probably feel like they're being charged where others are not. So,
Yeah, I mean, it was an issue in my mind on the McNabb vote that this was his property,
yeah.
and he was voluntarily putting out the chairs. But if we're asking developers to provide community space and putting an easement on it, but the developer is creating the community space as an amenity for their development, at what point is it something that they then would follow through on and populate with trees or planters or tables or whatever?
and
And
keep
that's
in
going to
mind.
come up more.
And keep in mind, some of the community spaces for extra height in the building. So
There's a trade-off.
there's a quid pro quo.
Yeah.
There's definitely a trade-off, but there's also that benefit, that public benefit, which is really critical, and that's what we heard in the Market Square,
Yep.
Master Square redesign.
Yep.
Information is that that's what people want. I think we need to be really, really careful, especially with Neapolitano is now the name of the pizza place on the corner.
Yep.
It was Tuscan Market.
Right.
Napolitano, and the delineation of that space. And if we define community space as not chairs not being charged for, we shouldn't be charging for those chairs.
Yeah, I think definitions would be helpful, because from the lawyer perspective, community space means a community space easement. I can almost guarantee you there is no community space easement in front of our beloved Market Square area that has been such a historical, different use, and the ownership and property rights and public rights are probably, they're historical, long predating
But the business,
community space
yeah.
easements. And so I think you're right. We have to come up with a definition that if we're going to use it narrowly, as the lawyers tend to do, it's a community space easement, then we need to be clear that that is the narrow definition versus a different sort of public areas.
Exactly, and the differentiation, I think, is important between the tables that are sitting in front of Maison Navarre and the Works and Ceres Street that are provided for public use.
They are public, yes.
Yes.
Versus the,
Because there's sidewalk encumbrances.
exactly, versus those that are provided for
Table service.
private table
Yep.
dining.
Yeah.
Yep, we agree,
So,
yeah.
so that needs to be delineated in a way that, it's really hard to charge Ceres Street for those sidewalk tables and chairs if we're not charging in other community spaces. So I mean, I personally would go about just not charging any of them. That's me, but, I would charge for the outdoor dining where it's roped off and,
Yeah.
clear, but.
Well, and you've got liquor license.
Yeah, because you've
Yeah.
got liquor license. And,
Right.
Yeah.
But that's, that's all, we need to explore those different definitions.
We'll work on the kind of building out here under the types of encumbrance, maybe we just build it right in the definition, like a column with definitions, or
Yeah.
we'll figure out how to build this out.
And Tuscan Market put those tables out there on, in Market Square, right? And we've never charged them?
No. Oh, we charge them for their tables and chairs.
Well, within the roped area.
In the
No,
roped area.
we charge them outside the roped area for the tables and chairs that the community considers community tables and chairs.
Right,
That there would be a
there's sidewalk
huge-
obstructions.
Right, there would be a huge outcry if those tables and chairs went away.
Yeah,
And they're provided for a fee currently.
so would it be easier just for the city to
they were not
provide those
feed.
chairs?
Yeah.
Pardon?
Wouldn't it be easier for the city just to provide those chairs out there?
Oh, no, we would rather not be responsible
I
for
know,
all those
but-
tables and chairs. We've got enough to be responsible for.
And this is my point that I'm
Yeah.
making, is that when you provide them, you have to maintain them, you have to store them, you have to, so there's already a financial
A charge,
investment
yeah.
happening, so
Yep.
That's a tricky one.
it's tricky, yeah, so lots to think about.
Okay. And I'll see what we can get you for the meeting on the 13th, and then I've got the to-do list for the next meeting, a whole bunch of items.
Okay, thank you. And I looked through, I'm assuming Attorney Farini will be back to discuss.
We hope so.
We have the outdoor dining, the encumbrance permit, we were going to clean up the ordinance for things that needed to be cleaned up. We also have the design standards, that maybe we should just take a quick look at our next meeting. And that's because permits start
Right.
issuing March 1st, so we need to make sure if we make a recommendation that people know that's coming to the council.
Yep.
Because it would come to the council after.
What's the 13th, by the way?
Fee committee.
Fee.
Fee committee, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So we need to be really clear that if there are any changes being made, that those are,
Yep.
to anybody applying for permits starting March 1st, that they're aware that there are going to be some slight changes before the ordinance everything goes into effect May 1st, and what those will likely be, or what could be coming forward, so they're all aware of it.
But I thought that we'd had pretty good input from EDC on those design
Yeah,
criteria.
I seem to recall that I know Jane was speaking with Peter Britz to see what, if any, feedback came back relative to this right here.
Right. The only feedback I had was related to planters not being planted.
Yep.
Where people put planters on top, but then they just left them empty.
This didn't come up at EDC.
Yeah,
The fees did not come up at EDC on Friday.
no. No, we're just talking about the design guidelines from last year.
No, last year, the EDC,
Oh,
Yeah,
we came up with a set of design criteria.
yeah,
yeah,
that's right. Oh, last year, okay, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I was
So,
going to say, that wasn't talked about.
no, it's just the design criteria. If there was something else, if there was anything else that came up, that's the only thing that came up for me, was that when you put out a planter box, you should plant it. That's-
Yeah, well,
I
that's
don't know.
true.
And maybe that should be more clear, that planter boxes get
Well,
Well,
planted.
Jackie Nooney retired, that's the.
So, I think but I think there might have been a few more things. So we can discuss that at our next meeting.
Yep.
And we'll just have to give a heads up.
Yep. And maybe what I'll do is I'll have Jane touch base with you as
Okay.
well, and we'll just make sure we've got everything that would
Are
be
we
most
meeting on
helpful.
the 24th?
That's what I have.
Yes,
Okay.
we are meeting on the 24th.
February.
Yes, and all of the invites should have gone out. I'm not sure if they did or not. I will double check and make sure legal sent out invites for meetings, subsequent meetings. I think they did go
thought
out.
so.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, I mean, they did that.
I've got the
I put
10th
it in,
of
but I just want to
March.
make sure,
yes. Yes, I'm planning on us meeting on the 24th.
24th of March. Yeah, I don't see anything for April yet on my calendar.
Okay, so we'll make sure that those go out
Yep. I know.
for April.
Barbara's sick too, yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, wait, I'm sorry. Once one's down, everyone's down.
Yeah.
So, Hope everyone gets better. I don't see anyone on for public comment. And I don't have any other announcements. We will be meeting again because we need to we'll handle this first at our next meeting. The encumbrance stuff for outdoor dining to make sure that's done.
Yep.
And beyond that, nothing else. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.